Hey guys, Mr. Backerberg here. In this video, we're going to look at reflections across axes. Now, before we get into looking at reflections of graphs, let's just talk about points for a second. So I want to take a look at my graph, and I want to talk about the point 3, 3. And let's say I wanted to take that graph and reflect it over my x-axis. So mirror it over my x-axis, so that was this point down here. What we should notice is that we should have the exact same x value because we're still 3 spaces over. But now what happened is instead of going 3 spaces up, we went 3 spaces down, which makes this y value a -3. So it's the same exact x value, but the y value changed signs. Now if I wanted to take that point and reflect it over my y-axis instead, mirror it over that y-axis, we would end up with this point right here. Now this time we went left 3 spaces, so that means -3 for my x value, but I'm still 3 spaces above the x-axis, so that's a +3 for my y value. And now lastly, let's think about mirroring this over both axes, so over the y-axis and over the x-axis, both at the same time. Okay, this would be reflecting it around the origin. So we would end up with this point down here. And for this point, we went left 3 spaces. So that means a -3 for my x value. And we also went down 3 spaces, which means a -3 for my y value. So looking at how this point changed as we reflected it over our axes, that's going to lead us into a discussion about how we can reflect equations or graphs around our axes as well. So here's what we're going to do if we're looking at trying to reflect graphs. Say we start with the normal equation y equals f of x, so just some function. If we want to reflect something across the x-axis, then what we're going to do is we're going to negate the function. We're going to multiply the function by -1. If we want to reflect something across the y-axis, we're going to focus specifically on the x values, and we're going to negate just the x values, so putting a negative on the x values. And then if we want to reflect something across the origin, we're going to do both of these things. We're going to negate the entire function and we're going to negate the x value. So we're going to multiply our entire function by -1 and we're also going to put a negative on all of our x's. So I want to take a look at the function f of x equals 5x minus 9 over x squared plus 3. And the first thing we're going to look at doing is an x-axis reflection. And we said in order to do an x-axis reflection, we were going to do y equals the opposite of our f of x, meaning that we were going to take our function and multiply it by a -1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 5x minus 9 over x squared plus 3, and I want to multiply this entire function by -1. Now when we're looking at doing this multiplying, I want to think about the -1 as a fraction. So -1 over 1. Now when we're doing this multiplying, we're going to multiply across the top. So what I need to do is distribute this -1 across the top of my fraction. So if I take -1 times 5x, I get -5x. And if I take -1 times this -9, I'm going to get a +9. But on the bottom, since we've got a 1 on the bottom of this fraction, multiplying by 1 doesn't change the denominator at all. So that's going to stay as x squared plus 3. And what I'm going to do is on my calculator, I'm going to graph out both of these functions to show that we reflected our graph around the x-axis. So I have both of my equations typed into my calculator. Now when I hit graph, we said we were trying to reflect this across the x-axis, so we should have a mirror image above our x-axis and below our x-axis. So if we compare our red and our blue lines, we did in fact reflect our graph over that x-axis. Now the next thing we're going to do is a y-axis reflection. And in order to do that, we're going to look at y equals f of -x. Meaning that in our function, we're going to replace all of the x's with a -x and then do some simplifying. So on the top of my fraction, I'm going to have 5, but I need to replace my x with a -x, and I'm going to subtract 9 from that. And then on bottom, I need to replace this x with a -x, but I still need to square that. and then I'm going to add 3 to that. Now I need to simplify this down. When I take 5 times negative x, I'm going to get negative 5x minus 9. But on bottom, when I square this negative x, when you square something that's negative, it becomes positive. So this turns back into a positive x squared plus 3. And I'm going to take this equation along with my original equation and graph them out on my calculator to show that we reflected our graph across the y-axis. So I have both of my equations typed into my calculator. When I hit graph, we're looking for a reflection over the y-axis, so a mirror image over the y-axis. So we can see that we did in fact reflect our graph around the y-axis. That's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching.